Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this evening's commemorative stamp release function. It's the International Year of Crystallography, and 2014 is a special year for the crystallographers. On behalf of IISc, I welcome you all to this evening's function. May I request the dignitaries to come on stage, please. Chief guest, M.S. Ramanujan, Director Professor Balram, INSA President Professor R. Gadakar, Professor Gautam Desiraju, and Professor T.N. Guru Rao. I will now request Priya to hand over the floral bouquets to the dignitaries on the dais. To the Chief Guest, M.S. Ramanujan, Chief Postmaster General, Karnataka Circle. To Professor Balram, Director, Indian Institute of Science. To Professor R. Gadakar, President, INSA. To Professor Gautam Desiraju. And to Professor T.N. Guru Rao. I'd like to invite the Director, Professor Balram, to render his welcome address, and also request him to take over the proceedings.
Good afternoon. Let me welcome Mr. Ramanujan specially to this function. Very gracious of him to have agreed to come and release the stamp. A word about the stamp release itself. This is the International Year of Crystallography, and we are fortunate that we have in the Institute as professor the President of the International Union of Crystallography, Professor Gautam Desiraju. The international unions have in each country an adhering body, and that body is the Indian National Science Academy in Delhi. But it so happens that the President of the Indian National Science Academy is also a professor in the Institute, my colleague Professor Gadakar. So I think this will reassure students and faculty that the Institute is doing well, and also tell the Postmaster General that on our faculty we have a very large number of very distinguished personalities. I'm also very pleased that we have in the audience today some of our most senior crystallographers. It's a real privilege to see Professor Venkateshan here with us. My friend and colleague Professor Vijayan, who I think in many ways is Mr. Crystallography in the Institute. And most importantly, I would like to extend a very, very warm welcome to Mrs. Ramseshan. Professor Ramseshan was one of India's most distinguished crystallographers, director of this institute, and for a very long time a mentor to me when I was editing the journal Current Science. So I think it's a pleasure really to see Mrs. Ramseshan here in the audience. A word about why I am connected with the stamp release function. When the idea of producing a stamp for the International Year of Crystallography arose, Gautam Desiraju came to me and said, you must write a letter of support. It's a very important scientific area. And I said, of course, I know crystallography is quite important, and therefore we must produce a stamp, even though most people, I think, today don't stick stamps and don't write letters. But really use, I think, electronic means of communication. I wrote the letter, and after a little while I found that the Department of Posts in Delhi decided that I was the one behind the stamp release and began to conduct all correspondence with me, including asking me for 20 lakhs of rupees so that the stamp could be produced. And I believe that if you are in an administrative position, after a while you get stuck with all of this, and after some difficulty, both Gautam and I have successfully brought the stamp into production, of course with the very great help of the Department of Post, the Postmaster General, and so we are at the release function. I think in many ways releasing a stamp to recognize and commemorate a very important scientific event highlights the importance of science in the public eye, and therefore I think that such releases probably do us a lot of good in the scientific community. I hope all of you will use the stamps, at least on this one occasion, and begin to write letters once again. Thank you very much. I will now request Gautam Desiraju to tell us about the International Union and the International Year, and then subsequently request the Postmaster General to release the stamp and address us. Thank you.
We need the PowerPoint. Professor Balram, Director of the Institute, Mr. Ramanujan, colleagues, students and friends. Very pleased to speak to you this afternoon on the International Year of Crystallography, the IUCR of which I am the current president, and a little bit about the stamp, although I am told that I can't say too much about the stamp before it's released, and I have followed your instructions strictly in this matter. What is IYCR 2014? The International Year of Crystallography commemorates not only the centennial of X-ray diffraction. I mean, this began, of course, with the work of Max von Laue in 1912, W.H. Bragg and W.L. Bragg later that year, the award of the Nobel Prize to Laue in 1914 and to the Braggs in 1915, but also the 400th anniversary of Kepler's observation and the role of symmetry. But for many of us in the audience, scientists, we think of crystallography as having begun with post-diffraction crystallography, but it is important to remember that this subject existed quite a bit before diffraction was discovered. So there is a pre-diffraction crystallography also, as people will be anxious to tell you. So in the end, this year celebrates a subject, and to tell you a little bit about the technicalities, it needs to be proposed by a member state of the UN to the UN, and this was the Kingdom of Morocco in July 2012. And the UN had designated the IUCR and the UNESCO to be the two partners for facilitating the implementation of this incident and event worldwide. I mean, these are the aims, and I'd like to emphasize again in a scientific institute that something like an international year is not just trying to organize scientific conferences and writing papers in scientific journals, because that's what we scientists do anyway. That's in the part of the day's work. So it is something a lot more than that and a lot bigger. It is to disseminate the idea of science itself among the lay public, society in general. That's why UNESCO comes in. Cultural aspects are involved, social aspects are involved. It has to do with telling school children in remote parts of the world. You know, some of the countries where we have started programs for the International Year are as far-flung as Fiji, Albania, Uruguay and so on. not countries that you normally associate, with advanced science. And the thing is about outreach. And at a time like this, when people have become very cynical about science in general and big projects and so on, it is to get people interested at the grassroots, to tell them that there is something still going for science and that it is a worthwhile thing for young people to take up, to get interested in. So it's a very broad canvas. And as far as the IUCR and UNESCO have been concerned, we decided right in the beginning to keep out of national level activities, to keep out of individual activities or institutional activities like this one, but to really think about large-scale international activities, of which there are three: the opening ceremony, the open labs, and the summit meetings. The opening ceremony, of course, was held last week in Paris in the UNESCO headquarters, and it was attended by about 800 people. And at this occasion, we've been planning for this for about a year or so, because compared to other international years, the IUCR had a very, very short lead time. We had just a year and a half to get the whole thing going. When we started our planning, the Director General of UNESCO, Madame Bakova, she told me, she said, concentrate on the BRICS countries. And I didn't know why she said this at that time. But in the end, as it turned out, the opening ceremony in the final analysis was financed by 3 of the 5 BRICS countries. So I think she knew what she was saying, and this also gives a bigger meaning and implication for where science is going in general. These BRICS countries, of which we are one, are countries which have large populations, an economy that's getting better, and a large throughput of education down into the lowest levels. This is happening in China, certainly. And I realized during the planning for this international year that it is certainly happening in Brazil, in South Africa, and Russia, although a slightly different case, can certainly be compared with the other 4. And the secretary to our government, DST, Dr. Ramsamy, who came to the opening ceremony, gave a lecture there on crystallography in India, as did his counterparts from the other 4 BRICS nations. And he stressed these very same points. The fact that this is a subject, it's like an octopus, it's everywhere. I think some of you have seen the Nature issue of 29 January, which covers the IYCR. And then it says, let crystallographers celebrate, because this is, let them have their day, because it's a subject, people have called it a little sung technique. Everybody uses crystallography. Nobody wants to call themselves a crystallographer. I myself am an organic chemist by training, and I've used crystallography all the time. I'm happy to call myself both a chemist and a crystallographer. I don't, as I have said in many places, crystallography is not a bad word. I think people need not be ashamed to call themselves crystallographers. And this I say especially to chemists, biologists, and physicists in the audience. So there is an identity thing, which also I believe we will try to overcome during this particular year. So this is the opening ceremony. Then we have the open labs and summits. Now the idea here, again, I told you about outreach. In collaboration with the major instrument manufacturers and with UNESCO, we are organizing 15 open labs all over the world, where PhD students, postdocs, and young assistant professors will have a chance to use diffractometers and other advanced equipment. And once again, notice the countries where these are being held: Latin America, South America, Africa, including Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia. 4 labs have already been confirmed in Morocco, Algeria, Ivory Coast, and Uruguay. And others are set to follow. 3 summit meetings are being planned, where scientists, science administrators, people who give funds, politicians, and bureaucrats will be getting together to try to discuss the problems of doing science in some of these more unsettled parts of the world. The first one will be held in Karachi in April and will concentrate on chemical crystallography. The second one will be held in Campinas in Brazil and will concentrate on macromolecular crystallography. The last will be held in Bloemfontein in South Africa and it will concentrate on powder diffraction and mineralogy. And so the idea is really in all these cases is to use science, to use crystallography as a means of bringing nations together, to bring people together, and to stabilize science in portions of the world, regions of the world, where these things have not yet come up to the level, say, what they have come up in India or in the Institute or any other places. So these are the ideas of the summits and the open labs. And if you see, the white countries are the countries that don't adhere to IUCR. So you can see we've targeted these open labs and summits in places which, are still a little bit out of the pale. They still have to come in. I mean, India joined the IUCR in 1951, just 3 years after the union itself was founded. I mean, Pakistan has not joined till date, and it is going to join this particular year. And so this is just an example, but there are many others which, Indonesia might become a member, they say. But so it's a country where there's a lot of unorganized crystallographic activity going on. So there's no national association, there's no nothing in Indonesia. But it's a country of 120 million people, so we have to take such countries into account. Now, smaller things, outreach. We can do things also as an individual level. You don't need some UNESCO and IUCRs and all these things. You don't even need associations. You don't need INSA. You don't need academies. Just individuals can go and do. This is an example of a small outreach program that I initiated with Mr. Rajesh in SSCU, simply to go to schools and to start talking to school children about crystallography, the International Year, and about science in general. The response has been actually overwhelming, and you will see some examples downstairs when you go down. There is a brochure called Crystallography Matters, which was brought out by the UNESCO and IUCR. I simplified this brochure, made it suitable for school children, and started a program for translation into languages all over the world. And we've managed to do it in 4 Indian languages so far. So we have Kannada and Telugu, we have Malayalam and Hindi so far. Let me tell you, it's not an easy task. It's not at all an easy task, because it was found quickly that the number of words that are available in some of our languages, our vocabularies are not as rich as the English language. So in fact, I can say that in the Kannada version, I think we had sometimes good discussions between Professor Guru Roy and Professor M.R.N. Murthy about the exact Kannada word to use for a certain concept. And plus we needed people who are very good at the language itself. So it's not an easy task. And the Tamil version is floating somewhere between Delhi, Madras, California and Bangalore. It's still to reach me. So, so if it doesn't reach me, then I can't get it printed. The one in Slovenian has also been put up to tell you that this is an international program. So anybody in the audience who can translate this into any language at all, please feel free to contact me. And this is how it all started, but it's now becoming almost a worldwide effort to get this whole thing translated. And that's about all I really wanted to say. And since I'm not allowed to show the Indian stamp, here are some other stamps which are being issued. But I'm very happy to say, Mr. Ramanujan, that the Indian stamp will be the first one to be released during the international. So I'm sure many others will also come out during the year. And that's it. I'd like to thank once again Professor Balram. He underestimated his role in the whole project. Uday Balakrishnan and several others without whom this stamp would not have been a reality today. The last sales pitch as President IUCR, I will say, is that IUCR has started a new open access journal called IUCRJ, the first issue of which has just come out. And this is going to be a forefront journal in crystallography, and is aimed at a very high impact factor, with papers being looked at by an editorial board before they're even sent out for refereeing. The first 15 or 20 accepted papers have already appeared in this journal. So thank you all very much for sharing this Indian stamp function this afternoon, and I'd like to thank a great many people who have made this event possible at all. Thank you so much.
Says that I should request him to hand out 4 special albums, and he's promised to give me one of them.
Yes, I think Professor Balram showed me the concepts, and Mr. Ramanujan calls himself an insider, but I would like to present a commemorative ornament. Third one is for Dr. Uday Balakrishnan, please. Yes, sir. Both is for a very special crystallographer in the audience, somebody who was in the institute for many years and is now retired, Professor Venkateshan. I'd like to
Good evening to all of you. Padma Bhushan, Professor Balram, Professor Desi Raju, Professor Guru Rao, Professor Gadadkar, Sri Uday Balakrishnan, whom many of you know very well. He retired as a distinguished member of the Postal Services Board. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset I bring warm greetings to all of you from India Post on the occasion of the International Year of Crystallography. When Professor Desi Raju came to meet me some time back in connection with the stamp release, during the course of our conversation, I confessed to him my complete ignorance about the subject. And I said, my knowledge of science is very rudimentary. I left it behind at the high school. That was nearly 4 decades ago. And at that time, I hadn't heard of anything like crystallography. And the only times I came nearest to using the word in its noun form was when I will tell my wife that when she buys sugar, please look out for medium-sized crystals. And also in the office, sometimes with my officers, that is, okay, let us crystallize our options on this or that. So this is the closest I came to the word. But then that set Professor Desi Raju upon me, and he went on to elucidate in very simple and lucid terms what the subject is all about. Remember, Professor, you came along with one other scholar also. And in fact, she was in the process of getting educated herself, I think. And Professor Desi Raju went on to explain, the crystal, what is crystal and what is crystallography all about. If you may permit to share that, whatever little I picked up from him during the brief conversation. He said, you see, the commonest form of crystal that you see is in that sugar lump, what we call kalkand, which we offer to the Lord. He said that's the finest example of a crystal. And then he waxed eloquent about how beautifully the symmetry, even in such common everyday objects such as water drops, the crystal in the crystalware crockery that we use at home, and in every solid structure. He said that this is something about the arrangement of atoms in a molecular structure. So that was then, I was going back to my school days. So I really stood enlightened at that point of time that some of these things for administrators like us, many of these scientific topics and the work that is going on in the field of science, it becomes very arcane because we move away from that and we lose touch with our academics, our books. I'm basically a student of management and economics, but even that I have drifted far away. If any one of you would ask me something about that, I would draw a blank today. But be that as it may, I remember Albert Einstein once said, there are only two things that are infinite. One is the universe, the other human ignorance. And he said, I'm not sure about the universe. So ladies and gentlemen, I request you to pardon my ignorance on subject matter to talk to you any further on this. Well, Professor Balram said that stamps, what's the big deal, who writes mail anyway these days? These are all days of the internet and email. And of course we are once in a while referred to as the snail mail. But let me tell you, as they say, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Smart people, and I consider all of you smart here, they are once again discovering the romance of writing letters. There is a joy in writing a letter, in receiving a letter. There is a certain mental, I would say, beauty of sorts when you try to put your thoughts on paper, and that too on a brief paper, like a postcard or a couple of sheets that you want to insert into an envelope. So you summon your best, the best of your thoughts, particularly when you're writing and conveying very tender feelings, feelings of warmth and affection. So that really draws out the best in one's personality. And let me share this with Professor Balram here, that more and more young people are falling in love. And therefore, well, it is good business for us. But anyway, it's business as usual for us. Because even though the letters that you and I write has practically all but disappeared from the bags of the postman, there is one important thing that is taking place in the world of the postal business, and that is merchandise. People order things online, but finally somebody has to take the responsibility of collecting the consignment, transhipping it and delivering it. And that's what India Post is doing. India Post is now in the midst of a major transformation, because just as an outsider, the world of crystallography is completely mysterious to me. I'm sure India Post would be some kind of a mysterious thing for you all. You wouldn't be knowing what the hell the post office people are doing inside. Where is the need for post office and all this paraphernalia? Or even for that, the Postmaster General, what did this guy do? With some archaic sounding title. Well, friends, let me tell you that we are in the midst of what we call the 360-degree transformation. What is happening is the snail mail, as you all refer to it. We have realized the advantage of the management parable, where the snail is nothing better than a hare, and you all are familiar with the story of the hare and the tortoise. But then modern management pundits have learned to put the hare on the tortoise on the back of the hare, so that both of them reach the destination together at the same speed. So this is what is known as co-opetition. From cooperation and competition, you arrive at some kind of a middle ground called the co-opetition. Now, this is what is precisely happening in India Post. We have started rolling out a core banking solution to bring it at par with the best practices in the banking industry. Similarly, the best practices in the insurance industry, because we are dealing in insurance also, as you're all aware. And also our core job, that is our mailing functions. We are getting into high-tech, state-of-the-art sorting machines, high-speed sorting machines that will sort the mails at so many thousand pieces per minute and things like that. So all these things are happening, and of course this is driven by more than 500,000 people in the department. India Post is more than 500,000 strong, and this is being driven by the entire team of India Post. So this is what is happening inside India Post, and I can assure you that you have already started seeing outwardly a visible change in the way the post offices are looking today. The department has been able to standardize the external features of the post office, while at the same time addressing the internal features of a service, the quality of a service, in a more qualitative manner. And in the days to come, you will see India Post a completely rejuvenated and a reinvented organization. This is a more than 170 years old organization, and we are undergoing through a process of what is known as a kaya kalpa, a complete transformation, shedding off the old and taking on the body of a new youthful organization. A lot of things, exciting things are happening in the India Post today. But I won't bore you much with what is happening. Suffice to give you an outline of an idea that as much as crystallography, I find things that are happening in my department are very exciting. And many of my colleagues here would also share that excitement. The stamp release today, in fact, I was all the time thinking that I would tell you all that India perhaps was the first country to release a stamp on crystallography. But well, thanks to Professor Desi Raju, he didn't give me an opportunity to commit that blunder, and he showed intelligently the stamp released by a couple of other countries who have beaten us to the post. They have brought out the stamp on crystallography before us, but then, as he said, to commemorate the year of crystallography, the International Year of Crystallography, India Post is the first one to bring out a stamp such as what you are seeing right now. Essentially, this is about celebrating, about commemorating a significant development in a particular sector or a particular segment of human activity, human endeavor. Crystallography seems to have matured. This is what I could gather from what Professor Desi Raju described, that from the pre-diffraction days to what you have now, crystallography has evolved over time, and it finds extensive application in physics, chemistry, maths, biology, and material sciences and things like that. And celebrating this success, celebrating this development is what India Post has done today by bringing out this stamp. The release of this stamp confers upon crystallography as a science the public recognition, the Government of India's honor, the stamp of approval and the stamp of honor on crystallography. So this stamp, Professor, is a stamp of honor for crystallography. And more importantly, another exciting thing is happening in the science. Whenever a commemorative stamp is released, it is always the philatelist delight. Philatelists are people who collect stamps, and like collectors of many objects, you have people collecting all sorts of things. Pens, to cigarette lighters, to matchboxes, to shoes, footwear. A lot of crazy things they collect. And above all, like the hapless people like us, we collect grievances also. And all that we collect finally needs to be displayed. So these philatelists, what they do, as soon as this stamp has been put out today, they will start hunting for collecting this. They'll go to the post office, try to buy as much as possible, or those who are far away from where it's being released, even international purposes. Because these things, those who are in the field of collection stamps, they will be tracking, they will be hunting down what is happening on a daily basis, in which country, what stamp is being released, or what cover is being put out, and things like that. And they would immediately get onto this. Stamp collectors who are living abroad, they will start getting into correspondence with their stamp collectors and counterparts in India, and they would literally go to great lengths to buy and trade stamps. In fact, not many of you would be knowing that stamp is basically a financial instrument. It is traded on the stock exchange in many of the foreign countries abroad, particularly the United States. Next to the yellow metal, this is the only financial instrument whose value has been rising incessantly since Second World War. There has been no downward trend in the graph of the value of stamps since Second World War. Now this may sound as some kind of a news, or maybe a bolt from the blue for you. That is it such a small piece of paper would it command such a big value? Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it does. Because those who are in the game, philately, see in India, stamp is not traded actively in the financial market, in the capital market. It's yet to acquire that kind of maturity. But then internationally elsewhere, people who are in this game, they know and they actively buy and sell stamps. And stamps today, many of the stamps, I'm told, the penny black and things like that are running into crores and crores of rupees, millions of dollars. You need to only visit the eBay to know the value of stamps. Stamps are auctioned, stamps are put out for sale. A 20 rupee stamp sells for 2,000 rupees and couple of lakhs of rupees. It all depends on its value, and the value is, of course, it is figured out on the basis of some special characteristic of the stamp itself, or by the theme. Like for example, crystallography is a rare scientific theme. Only few countries have brought out stamps on that, and India is one among them. So these are some of the features. Only those who are into that field, they would be knowing what are all the things to be looked at, and then they have an eye for that. They start collecting and they sell, and they make money in the process. They have hordes of it, and we have brilliant set of collections. And these stamps are all displayed. They participate in national and international exhibitions, and it's really beautiful. Sometime back, the Indian Railways had also organized a philately on wheels, which ran across the country and a couple of states also, just to bring home the message of the beauty of stamp collection. So this appears to be a very mundane and very simple thing, a small piece of paper which has to be stuck on a piece of mail, but then there is more to it than what meets the eye. So this briefly about India Post and the significance of stamp which we have released today. We are here to listen to Professor Guru Rao, who I think most of you are research scholars here, can see a lot of young faces. I'd be keen to listen to what's happening in crystallography and the frontiers of crystallography. On behalf of India Post professors, I once again would like to felicitate the crystallography department and all the professors, research scholars and scientists engaged in this endeavor to carry crystallography as a subject to greater heights and enrich the body of scientific knowledge. Thank you.
You know, before I request Professor Guru Rao to give his talk, I might just mention for the benefit of the Postmaster General that maybe 20 years ago, before the information technology revolution, the single most important individual in the institute was the postman. He came in twice a day, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and he brought us news of acceptance and rejection of all manuscripts, fellowships, and good and bad news from home. Thank you very much. Guru.
Thank you, Professor Balram. I was just reminded of something which happened about 30 odd years ago when Mr. Ramanujam was talking about letters. I sort of thought that I should share it with you before I start my talk. This happened when I was in the National Chemical Laboratory, and it so happened that my wife came to Bangalore and she was actually forced to stay for a couple of months. And then she got bored one day and decided that she will write a letter to me. And that letter was 4.5 pages long. She wrote everything, whatever. I don't remember now what she wrote, I must confess on that. But she wrote 4.5 pages. And when it reached me, I took about more than half an hour to read that letter. And then I had to reply to this letter. And that's the most difficult task, because she is an MA in English, and her English was immaculate, and my English is terrible. So that was my first issue. More than half an hour to read that letter. And then I had to reply to this letter. And that's the most difficult task, because she is an MA in English, and her English was immaculate, and my English is terrible. So that was my first issue. The second issue was that the letter was having all kinds of information which one can think of over the last 2 months, and I had no information except to write about whatever structures we did, whatever papers we wrote, and so on. And that would be really boring for her. So what I did was I replied. Of course I had to send a letter back. So I replied saying that, oh, thank you very much for your letter. I feel exactly the same as you felt. So I still remember this letter issue when Mr. Ramanujam mentioned about it. So what I will do in the next 20 minutes or so is to talk about crystallography in India. I do agree that 20 minutes may not be a real time that is required, but I'll try to cut it short to 20 minutes. I'll talk about the past, present, and future of crystallography. This is something when a couple of weeks ago when Desiraju asked me to give this talk, I said, okay, I will try. But then he said, you have no choice because Balaram has already decided that you should talk. So there was some conspiracy between these two gentlemen which made me end up with giving this talk. And I take this opportunity to thank all the people here because this is an occasion which is a very joyous occasion. This is where India is bringing out a commemorative stamp to celebrate the International Year of Crystallography 2014, and it's really heartening that I am a part of this meeting. The second thing, of course, is that I would like to dedicate this talk to the father of the nation. You all remember that today is Sarvodaya. So I would like to dedicate this talk to Mahatma Gandhi. The crystallography. When we talk about crystallography, the first thing which occurs to us is crystals, as Mr. Ramanujam referred to, the crystals of sugar. He's very lucky because his wife only referred to crystals of sugar. She didn't refer to these crystals which I'm showing here, where he would have spent all his salary for the last 4 months. And these are the crystals which were really very important in life for human beings. In fact, these crystals decided whether you have a kingdom or not in earlier days. So the amount of crystals you possessed your kingdom, and you stayed in that kingdom and enjoyed it. So mostly crystals, when we refer to, are jewels. These are the jewels to which we refer to very often. There's also an interesting area called crystal gazing. People used to predict the future by looking at crystals. And this is something where many people believe that the future can be foretold. I think even Nostradamus looked at crystals before he made these predictions. The other one is a very interesting thing where Buddhist monks thought that crystals can heal diseases. They used to take these calcite crystals and rub on the wound and assume that it is going away. So probably they used to rub it so hard that the wound will heal by itself and eventually cause the healing. So there was a healing action of the crystals which were being used. But what happened is that as crystallography as a subject grew, I will define crystallography in a minute from now. As it grew, we started looking at these kind of crystals. Professor Vijayan will be very delighted that these kind of crystals can come out when he makes his enormous efforts to get these crystals of proteins and viruses and so on. This is not here, but while proteins, viruses and so on grow in these kind of crystals. So we have different kinds of morphologies, different kinds of shapes and so on. And in fact, on the 20th of January 2014, when the opening ceremony was made, the United Nations General Secretary made this statement, which in fact more or less describes what crystallography is all about. It is the very core of revealing the structure of DNA, fabricating computer memories, and designing potent new drugs. But only a tiny fraction of the world's people are aware of the science of crystallography, a knowledge gap the United Nations hopes to help erase this year. And that's how this year has been declared as the year of crystallography. Let's go further and see what is crystallography. If you look at definitions, we get millions of definitions, but I thought this could be a definition with which we can comfortably live with. It is the science of condensed matter with an emphasis on atomic and molecular structure and its relation to physical and chemical properties. So effectively, we eventually reach to the properties of the material, and therefore any material under study, when subjected to crystallization and eventually evaluation of the property of the crystal in terms of crystal structure determination, will lead us to the understanding at the atomic and molecular level the related property of the given material. So if this is wood and it is hard wood, and that is wood which is soft wood, we will know why hard wood is hard and soft wood is soft by looking at the crystallographic approach of looking at materials. So this is an unequivocal methodology by means of which we can determine, and that's how crystallography gets a very major impetus in understanding any material and eventually to the property of the given material. And therefore any material research which goes on in and around is all dependent upon the structure of the material, which can be determined by crystallography. The only requirement crystallography needs is, of course, crystals. And unless we have the crystals, we cannot do this particular kind of work. Crystallography, therefore, analyzes, what it analyzes is the diffraction patterns which come from the beam of X-rays, electrons and neutrons. What is inherent in the crystals is this factor, which I have taken. These two are the pictures, nothing to do with the crystallographer, but these are the drawings drawn by M.C. Escher, an abstract painter who imagined these kind of possibilities of drawing and completing the two-dimensional space in these particular diagrams. And you see that there is a translational symmetry that one can perceive in this diagram. There is a threefold relationship between the 3 fish here and the 3 birds, flying birds here. And then, of course, the 6 tortoises which surround it, they also have a threefold symmetry which goes around it. So effectively, the crystals build around symmetry. So symmetry by far is the most important thing when eventually solids build up in the form of crystals. And symmetry controls the crystal formation. If that is the case, then when we send in a beam of X-rays, X-rays are of the order of 1 angstrom wavelength, and when they fall onto the sample, they scatter. And because of the fact that the wavelength that is associated with it is much, much smaller than the size of the material, effectively the X-rays go into the material. In fact, I am giving you this basics because I see that most of you are getting a little bored because you know all this, but I thought I should give this information to the people from the postal department. so they should know something about what is really happening. So what happens is that the periodicity, as we call it, which is within these kind of diagrams, which eventually you can imagine that each of these animals, which are shown here, the strange animals, they are molecules. And if these are molecules, we want to see the detail of the molecule. The detail of the molecule can be seen. For example, we want to see the eye of this fish, we want to see the bird's beak, and so on. If you want to do that, we have to now go in and see very closely these pictures. And so we have to go into the crystal and see these features, and these features can be seen, unfortunately not directly like we would like to see here, but we will see in these forms. And these are the X-ray diffraction patterns. If we use X-rays, we can also use electrons and neutrons. So what you do is you take a crystal and stick it up on this particular machine, and then you go for a coffee. Come back from the coffee, you will see some indication that whatever crystal you have put is a good crystal. And then after that, another hour or so, you will get the structure of the entire material, and we will have the structure of the molecule, and also the molecule in which, the way in which it packs and so on. So this is the basis of all the ideas of crystallography. In fact, I always keep telling my students that crystallographers are their own enemies, because they have made the area so simple. What all you have to do is to press a few buttons. You know, it's very easy, just like your postal sorting goes. You have to just put a few buttons and the sorter works. Similarly, we can get the crystal structure these days by just pressing a few buttons. And in a matter of 2 hours, you will have the entire structure at your fingertips. Let's see how we go further. We will go now into the past. I'll take you almost 100 years ago, when the British era really started. And with the British era, 2 centers were set up as centers of advanced research, advanced education. Obviously, this was not to the liking of the British government, so it took a little while to get things settled down. But eventually, the 2 centers, the Cultivation of Science, Indian Association of Cultivation of Science in Calcutta, and Indian Institute of Science, IISc Bangalore. These were the 2 centers. And the first ever crystallographic work which appeared in literature was done by a person by name Banerjee, Kedareshwar Banerjee, and he published it in Nature in 1930. It's very interesting now. The ambition of any of us, in fact any of our younger audience here, is to get a paper in Nature. And it is very, very, very difficult, as all of us realize. But most of the publications in those days appeared only in Nature, because the number of journals that were available were very limited. And Nature was one of the journals by means of which you could communicate to the rest of the world. But it needed a lot of courage. Courage, because you had to send this result to a Britisher, who were governing, and they were controlling our country, and they had to evaluate it, and evaluate your English as well as your work. And as a consequence, it was not an easy task to do. And so the credit goes to this gentleman. He is Kedareshwar Banerjee. In this picture, you also see Homi Bhabha. This is a picture taken much later than 1930. And I just got it from some old literature. And I think this was in your publication in the IUCR special issue, Desiraj's publication. Then, of course, like all of science which began in India, C.V. Raman was the person who started this area as well. He started so many things, and with C.V. Raman, Saha, Krishnan, and Bhagwantam were the people who really started the work in crystallography. And he has 2 wonderful students. The 2 wonderful students were G. N. Ramachandran and Professor S. Ramaseshan. Mrs. Ramaseshan is here, so I take a special, I want to make a special mention of Professor Ramaseshan and of course Professor G.N. Ramachandran. They are the two pinnacles of crystallographic growth in this country. Remember, these are in the early times, and the crystallography was not so very easy to do. And in between, I have put the picture of Professor A.R. Verma, who actually came back after a training in University of London, and he started a group in BHU, Banaras Hindu University, and he started looking at the crystal growth, how crystals grow, how crystals can be evaluated in terms of their growth characteristics. Can we grow a square crystal? Can we grow a cuboidal crystal? And why a cuboidal crystal is a crystal of that shape and so on. So such work was started in the laboratory of A.R. Verma. So basically, this is the group which essentially started crystallography in the country. Of course, a little more about G.N. Ramachandran, as most of you know this. G.N. Ramachandran, I must immediately say that he got the highest possible crystallography prize the crystallographers can give, the Ewald Prize in 1999. It so happened in 1999 I was at University of Glasgow, the same place where the meeting was held in 99. And on behalf of G.N. Ramachandran, who was indisposed, I remember Professor Vijayan came and gave a wonderful talk on behalf of Ramachandran and received this award. The year is 1999. The award obviously concerned with the achievements of G.N. Ramachandran. G.N. Ramachandran determined the triple helical structure based on not a crystal of the kind I was talking about, but based on a fiber which was mounted, the fibrous proteins and the fiber diffraction data which he got. And so he essentially started structural biology in our country. A picture like this now can be converted to a picture like this, and that is in terms of the atoms and molecules which I was talking about. I will not go into the detail of it except to tell you that this is not a simple task. Even to this day it is not a simple task, because going from a fiber diffraction pattern to a realistic structure needs a lot more effort, not just pressing a few buttons as I was mentioning before. It needs a little more effort even to this day, and therefore this is a wonderful piece of work. And more interestingly, around the same time the work on the double helix came up from the international arena, and the work on the double helix of course received an enormous amount of attention because it determined the structure of the molecule for life, which is DNA, and that was a double helix, whereas this structure is a triptych interpretation which was done by G.N. Ramachandran. But wow, DNA is DNA. DNA is the one which attracts more attention than collagen. Collagen is something which we can repair any time. There is a cartilage damage, we can repair it and so on. So as a result, this work, even though is much more higher quality, I would say, than structural determination of DNA, received a lesser attention. But this is a remarkable piece of work which he did with whatever facilities we have had in those days. He also worked on the 5-psi map. I will not go into the detail of it because I think I should finish in time. A diagnostic tool to evaluate protein structures, and this is still used as a diagnostic tool to evaluate the protein structures to this day. He did one more very interesting thing. He got hold of all the top crystallographers of the world who are listed here, and he got a meeting in Madras, and that was the best part of crystallographic development in the country. He got all these people together in 1960 and got all the Indian crystallographers together, and they had a wonderful meeting in 1960, probably the first meeting they ever had on crystallography in the world, in this part of the world. And that was a very important step. And of course, this is how G.N. Ramachandran made his contribution in the beginning. And of course, the next major contribution I would like to list here. There are several others, but the major contribution from Professor S. Ramaseshan was the work which he did with Professor Venkateshan. Ramaseshan and Venkateshan is here in the audience. The Ramaseshan and Venkateshan in 1957, I think I was about 6 years old. Okay. I was in primary school. They determined the structure by using what is known as an anomalous dispersion, which is essentially mathematical. I must say immediately here that all the development in the early days of crystallography was done by physicists. And it was a physicist regime that actually sort of ruled crystallography. So the chemists and the biologists were just looking in awe to the way in which the crystallographers, based on physics, were determining the structures. But as it so happens that this anomalous dispersion methodology now is the basis for all these new technologies which are developed in determining the macromolecular structures. and that way the contribution is of immense value. There are two issues which came up in the textbook which was written way back in 1966 by Ajit Ram Verma and his student P. Krishna, coming from where they defined two terms, polymorphism and polytypism, and today polymorphism forms the major basis for any kind of pharmaceutical research in the world. And that way the beginning work on polymorphism and polytypism more or less emanated from India. And that way this is a major contribution which was made in the early days. Then the next generation. So we go from generation to generation. We are still in the past, by the way. We go to the next generation where there were so many others who got into the fray. So many others of high quality and they were a key component for the advances made in crystallography. The first is Srinivasan and Parthasarathi. They both worked on the development of structure determination methodology, working at the University of Madras with Professor G. N. Ramachandran, and their contribution to statistical evaluation of crystallographic research has been quoted very many times. I have put Venkateshan, Manohar and C.N.R. Rao in red, nothing to do with dangerous people, but I have put them because of the fact that these three are the chemists. They became chemists. C.N.R. Rao was already a chemist, but that's why the red color is slightly different here. Venkateshan and Manohar were both trained as physicists, but then they decided to go into chemistry departments. I still remember, I'll come to that part of the story in a minute from now, Venkateshan sitting in a place and then listening to all the organic chemists talking about how the electron is now getting away from one bond to the other, drawing arrows and all that, and he or me, we never understood what they were talking about, the organic chemists. So that's the kind of a situation into which they entered. That's why I must appreciate their efforts. Venkateshan and Manohar in the Department of Inorganic Physical Chemistry, these two gentlemen were the ones who started it. M.A. Vishwamitra, on the other hand, decided that he will go slowly towards biology. And then he started looking at nucleotide structures, dinucleotide, slightly becoming bigger and bigger sized molecules. He had a wonderful collaboration with Olga Canal, and as a consequence, he could get data and analysis done in the United States, in the United Kingdom, and he made several trips across from here to there. But Venkateshan and Manohar stuck to India and developed methodologies in chemical crystallography. And I would say that these two gentlemen were the major inputs, and they enhanced crystallographic research in chemistry in the country. Then, of course, the group of the A.R. Verma, who had these many people, P. Kishan Lal, who recently came out from the presidents of being the president of INSA, and Raghavendra has just taken over as the president of INSA. O.N. Srivatsav, G. Singh, Trigunayat. These people started working on crystal growth mechanisms, slowly started developing the techniques of X-ray tomography. And this is something again, which is an area which was well recognized in the beginning. And of course, eventually it forms the basis for the diagnostic tools in CAT, the CAT analysis and CAT analysis and so on. So these three gentlemen were at IISc. These people were at BHU. Then Chidambaram, on the other hand, he is also a physicist who went out from IISc. He started neutron diffraction work in BRC. So BRC had by then put the Atomic Energy Commission has put up our reactors, and so they could get the thermal neutrons, and using thermal neutrons, Chidambaram and his group of people, they determined several neutron structures. There is a special way in which neutron diffraction works compared to X-ray diffraction. I will not go into the detail of it, but that's an area which was also started in India at that time. Khandan, of course, was also associated with Vishwamitra in the earlier days. These two gentlemen did something which nobody had done before. Vishwamitra and Khandan made a crystal of a liquid on the diffractometer. The first ever in situ cryocrystallography experiment done on the surface of the earth. And this was done in our physics department with liquid air. And they had liquid air. I think Vijayan has seen this experiment. And they used liquid air and made the crystal in situ as the diffraction data was collected. And this is in fact now a very prosperous area, and I practice it very regularly. And for me it is very easy. For them it was very, very difficult in those days. So this is an area which is also to be recognized. G.B. Mitra, he did a lot of work on crystal statistics calculations, crystallographic, I would call it mathematical crystallography. I still remember when G.B. Mitra was giving the talk, none of us understood what he was talking about. But then he did develop the methodologies, theoretical crystallographic methodologies, by means of which you can find out certain special features. You can look at, for example, defects in solids, and then evaluate the Burger vector, which is a responsible thing for dislocations and so on in crystals. And these calculations were done by G.B. Mitra at Kharagpur. L.M. Pant at NCR, he was the first person to sort of initiate work in charge density studies. He also had a group which was doing chemical crystallographers, again emulated from L.M. Pant's group, but all of them are physicists. We must make a note of that. Because these days, when some of my students go for the interview, who are also physics-based people, the interview committee apparently says, you are not qualified in the chemistry department because you are a basic physics person. Even to this day, this kind of a thing carries on, which is a pity in our country. Anyway, Anantaraman, Ramachandra Rao, Ranganathan, G.V.S. So this is a very interesting group. And this group did something which is not really as conventional crystallography. They looked at crystallography of something where the crystals are not really crystals, but they have some complications in them. In fact, at one time, they almost reached a stage where they did considerable amount of work to reach to the levels of identifying what we call now as the quasi-crystals. And it so happens quasi-crystals got the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago, a few years ago, and these people missed out narrowly. In fact, the work done by this particular group, and eventually Ranganathan, I will talk about him a little later, who continued the work in this department in the institute. These people did a considerable amount of work in that direction. C.N. Rao and his group were doing complex oxides, structures of very complex materials, and this was the beginning of solid-state chemistry in the country. So a considerable amount of solid-state chemistry work was done by C.N. Rao and his group. X-ray diffraction was used as a tool, even though the X-ray diffraction results were extended to applications eventually in this particular group. So this is the next generation. Now I'll go a little faster. I need another 5 to 8 minutes to finish because I'm still in the past. I should come very fast to be reasonably faster to the present situation and then make a prediction on the future, whatever I think of. What I will do hereafter is to go with my friends. So what happened is somewhere in this I will call as the dark age of crystallography. This is something which Gautam Desiraju referred to in his special article which he wrote for the IUCR as well. Because this is called the dark age because we lost out in the race. All quality people, crystallography people which I mentioned in the previous slide were all there, but we did not have facilities. We could not afford to get the facilities by means of which we can do high quality data collection, high speed computers, computer graphics. None of these were available. And of course, Vijayan just then joined, a very young, enthusiastic person. I still remember the first day I met him, and he joined. And then he developed an interest to see whether we can get the possible facilities, if not the best in the ranks, at least a facility which we can start working with. And these 4 fellows, along with me, were the ones who were the beginning, what should we say, we entered the dark age. And that is very interesting because we were the ones who were always together. We always took risks. For example, mostly choose problems to suit the existing facilities. This was a disaster. In fact, I still remember once whenever we get a triclinic structure, Professor Venkatesan will say, no, we'll not do it because we don't have the facilities to do this, and you are not capable of doing it. Both he will say. So as a consequence, we leave out some interesting compounds, and we will go for only crystals which are orthorhombic and higher. This gentleman was a person who took a challenge. Vijayan said, don't do this, it's looking very complicated. It's a triclinic. You know, in the case of a triclinic system, because of the angles not being equal to 90 degrees, the different interpretation of the Weisenberg becomes extremely difficult. And when Vijayan said that, he said, no sir, I'm going to do this. And he worked something like, I don't know, he was always awake. And he did a lot of work in such a way that eventually the structures of triclinic systems started coming, and the work with Vijayan paved the way for the futuristic analysis of complex peptide units and so on, the peptide-peptide interactions, and eventually towards the prediction of the evolutionary pathways in proteins. I will not go into the detail of it. T.N. Bhatt, of course, deserted all of us now. He is not here in India, but he still remains a part of these four groups. M.R.N. Murthy and Ramkumar. I don't see Ramkumar either here. So these are my buddies, and we are always together, going to movies and telling KV that we are at the library and things like that. You know, this was a era where we had to go through this. And how did we come out of this? How did it all happen to come out of the Dark Ages? And there were these brave hearts. These brave hearts again, you know, they did enormous amount of work. Venkateshan and Ramamurthy, they did photochemical reactions in organic solids. Manohar on topotactic reactions, inorganic solids, natural products. Vishwamitra, nucleic acid crystallography. Chidambaram began the program, as I mentioned, neutron diffraction in BRC. Kishan Lal on crystal growth and X-ray topography at NPL. Srinivasan Parthasarathy on structure determination. L.M. Pant on charge density. C.N.R. Rao on solid state chemistry at IIT Kanpur and later at IISc. S. Chandrasekhar on liquid crystals at Raman Research Laboratory. So work on liquid crystals began. As you all know now, we are worried about when the liquid crystal TV will come and we can take a piece of it. It will be like a sheet which we can fix it on the wall and start watching TV, and we can fold it and put it in our pocket, take it wherever we want, watch the television again. So this kind of research was started, remember, believe it or not, in the 60s in our country. Anantaraman Ranganathan here is in the audience. I see him there. They worked on quasi-crystals, and they developed a very strong group on determining the structures of these very, very complicated crystals. Of course, what the facilities we had, why did I call it as Dark Age? We had these kind of facilities. This machine resembles your old sorting machine, and we used to punch cards on these. These are the punched cards, and we used to have so many punched cards with which we have to process the data. This was the biggest computer of those days, which was in IISc. And we used to stand in a line to get the time on this machine. Balaram was very fortunate because he worked with G.N. Ramachandran. He had an overnight run free. Am I right? Night runs were free for GNR's group, not for us. But we used to sort of nicely talk to these GNR's group people and get our jobs done as well. So those were the days. And this used to take, if one card is wrongly punched or missed, we will lose a week. So to find one bond length and one bond angle, and here is a small story I would like to tell very quickly, that there was this person by name Bandari, who is no more, unfortunately. His professor is H. Manohar. And when his thesis was submitted, it went to a very high-level British scientist. And he evaluated the thesis and sent the thesis back saying that there has been an error in this calculation. His entire chapter 2 should be removed, or the thesis cannot be accepted. And that day, Professor Venkateshan, I saw him for the first time angry with us, because I was the one who ran the program for that. And as a consequence, we had a real serious problem, and then we discovered that the British fellow had given it the thesis to evaluate to one of his postdoc persons. And the postdoctoral fellow did not put the beta angle. He forgot to put the beta angle. So the bond lengths and angles were all very wrong. And so we had to prove it. And the whole night we sat in the computer center here, and I remember 2 nights, in fact, eventually, to prove beyond doubt to Professor Venkateshan that we have these 2 structures really worked out. The correct structure worked out with the right beta. And then, of course, the professor from the UK offered Bandari the fellowship, which Bandari rejected. He went to Hank Sobel later. So this is the way of work which was going on. I just thought I will show my first ever paper. You see that this is my first ever paper in my life, and this was the structure. We had no computer graphics. This is how we used to draw. So if you want to see that C3 is coming towards C5, you draw 2 lines coming like that. And if you want to show that C3 is going inwards, this is how we drew the 3-dimensional diagrams. And now you see what we can do. Just press a button and you get any diagram you want. So I would say that out of the Dark Ages, there were 2 people, very key people who took us out of the Dark Ages. I'll come to 2 others later, but these 2 were the main architects. I would like to call them as architects because they brought the country out of the Dark Ages. He was quick to identify the lacuna. He procured the facilities, found a single crystal. In fact, I got my job also. and leading to my powder diffraction activity, where we did this reed field refinement, which is a very complicated way of looking at powder structures. We could even solve an ab initio crystal structure in those days, in the early 90s. Apart from just suggesting to DST to set up a wide range of X-ray facilities, he also insisted that these X-ray facilities should go to different parts of the country. And so it spread all around the country. There are several X-ray machines which are now working in different parts of the country. He did not keep quiet. He also tried his hand on crystallography. He did the first charge density analysis on this compound, which is a nitrophenol, and he published the first ever charge density paper from India, and that credit goes to him as well. So this is how the structural activity associated with it came out slowly of the dark ages because of setting up of all the modern facilities. Vijayan, who is here, he made remarkable and significant contributions. As Balaram rightly put it, he is the crystallographer. What did you say? I forgot. You said something about Vijayan. Mr. Crystallography. Okay. Mr. Crystallography, because he made significant strides to develop structural biology in the country. He set up a national facility here with the help of DST, DBT, CSAR. He procured the state-of-the-art facilities, and in fact, he has spread a very large culture of crystallographers around the country. And he with him were Murthy, then Ramakumar, Suguna, Gopal, T.P. Singh. Wherever I have shown them in bold, their students now are also in the fray of crystallographic community around the country. So a very strong structural biology group has been set up by the efforts of Vijayan. So these two architects essentially form the current day status in crystallography. There were two others who were sort of in the background, stayed in the background, and came slowly into the limelight. And one of them happens to be the gentleman who is now the IUCR president. He was a very clever fellow. He saw the situation. We were in the dark ages. He saw our facility. In fact, we used to have discussions in those days. He was in Hyderabad, I was in Pune. He said, well, he stuck to existing facilities. This is the beauty of it. He did not worry about why we should go for a diffractometer, why we should do experiments and so on. So he stuck to these existing facilities, and then he started a new area called crystal engineering. He looked at the information already available in crystallographic literature, which was an enormous amount of data, and he put them into a nutshell. He analyzed these data sets and started the so-called crystal engineering area. I'll not go and keep on praising him, but this is an area which has now emerged as one of the major areas in crystallographic research around the world. Most of the groups around the world, particularly in chemistry, they follow this crystal engineering area, and he has established the role of weak intermolecular interactions, CHO, halogen bonding, to name a few. On the other hand, it is me who wanted to stick to doing experiments. Somehow my blood has some kind of an extra effort that I should put to do experiments. And in this country, doing experiments is impossible, more or less impossible in those days. The moment I start a data, power will go. And then I'll go back and then start a UPS, because those days automatic start of UPSs were not there. You have to go and start a UPS. Then you realize the battery is out. So these kind of difficulties one has to go through, but eventually with the help of CNR Rao, we set up a few facilities within the SSCU. We were able to do those work which I have already mentioned about the ab initio structures and so on. One of the major things which I received as a person is the support from DST IRFA, which was to be defended quite extensively. And then the Gordon Mehta encouraged me to put this DST IRFA project, and we set up the single crystal facility in 2000. And then, of course, I kept on bothering Balaram. He's a very good friend of mine. I keep bothering him, and sometimes he listens to me. I don't know when he listens to me, but eventually he listened to me and gave a support. Balaram and Balakrishnan, the two gentlemen who are now currently running the institute, we set up the existing X-ray diffraction facility, which is the state of the art. We have probably the best X-ray facility in the country now. We not only do that, we open it out to everyone. So the data that is available out of these machines are now available for anyone who comes to collect data. It could be from a very small university, it could be some university away from somewhere in south, somewhere in the north, it does not matter. Whoever wants the data, they can come and collect the data. Whoever wants to solve a structure, we help them. We have the paraphernalia to help them out. And apart from that, I quantified weak intermolecular interactions from experimental and theoretical charge densities. More than anything, the first two gentlemen created enormous amount of manpower for crystallographic research in India. As I already pointed out in biology, several strong groups have been set up. Both of us also started crystallographic research manpower. There's a large number of our students who are spread around the country. I just thought I will show this. This is the major thing which recently happened. He has this book released. This is by Vesiraju. And this is something which happened about a couple of weeks ago. Arunan is here. He made this proposal from a theoretical point of view, and we got the experimental proof by looking at this very little molecule. It's a small molecule. The person who wrote this got so excited that he made the molecule look bigger than the page, but it's a very small molecule. And we see that we have a new carbon bond. I won't go into the detail, but this seems to be a very fundamental result with which chemistry, some of the aspects of chemistry might be re-looked into. The current state of crystallographic research, macromolecular crystallography, there are lots and lots of groups. I have just listed three of them, in fact. The group of T.P. Singh, they look into structure-based inhibitor, and then allergen proteins by Salunke, and so on. Basically, macromolecular crystallography is now concentrating on structure-function correlations towards design of futuristic drugs. So this, therefore, is now forming the basis for macromolecular crystallographic research in the country. Small molecule crystallography, functional supramolecular gelators. We are now looking and collaborating with a large number of pharmaceutical groups. Nangia is, for example, looking on solid forms of the as-prepared ingredients with pharma industry. So effectively, we are looking at Natarajan here from the department is looking at the metal organic frameworks. So we have, therefore, in small molecule crystallography, the possibility of generation of futuristic materials with large number of application potential. So you see, crystallography has now become an area in which we are now looking forward to make materials and make materials with the desired properties. And this has been possible by the work which has been described before by an enormous amount of work done in the previous years. I just thought I will show you this statistics, particularly for those who want to know why so many machines are being brought and so on. We have a large number of machines, I do agree. You see in the year 2000, there were 2 single crystal machines which were bought. The first one was at NCL, and the second one was IISc. And then, of course, we started adding all these. This is, of course, for small molecule crystallography. I have not shown the macromolecular crystallographic support here. But as you see that the numbers kept increasing, and of course the funding increased around the 2007 mark from DST. But you see last year it has come down again, mainly because of the fact that there is the conversion rate. You know, the 60 rupee per euro became 85 rupee per euro, for example. As a consequence, the numbers have come down because the funding amounts are not enough. Whereas on the other hand, if you see the powder XRDs, the number is constantly increasing, and this is because the pharma industry has now gotten the importance or recognized the importance of powder X-ray diffraction, and as a consequence, we have so many instruments which are available in the country. Now the future, a couple of minutes. Future, obviously, looking at gazing at the future, we find one of these. I thought I will put this sentence because Hofsthaus, he's one of the senior crystallographers from University of Southampton, who is a small molecule crystallographer. He has a facility like ours where he serves the entire UK group for determining the structures. He was asked, what is the future of crystallography? So he made this long statement. I've just underlined these two, which we are anyway already doing in our country. Charge density analysis, crystal structure prediction, Gautam Desaraju and his students are doing. I also wanted to mention that we are also working on modulated structures, disorder and reactivity. Modulated structures, the group in BHU, which is now run by Dhananjay Pandey, they are looking at the aperiodic structures, and there's a considerable activity associated with those structures. These structures will tell us some special properties which we can introduce on materials which are not really active. So we can make them a little more active by doing modulations associated with structures. I already mentioned in situ crystallography, and as far as the macromolecules are concerned, we are working on proteins, enzymes, structure-based drug design, coordinate techniques like NMR, combining with them, and of course electron diffraction and microscopy. All this is looking very well, but we have a fear of another dark age. And this is something which bothers me, and so I thought I will share this. Synchrotron facilities, they are sunk into labyrinths. There are two synchrotron sources, Indus 1 and Indus 2. This is at the Raja Ramana Center of Advanced Technology at Indore, but no successful reports from that. Now we have the macromolecular features, but this is over so many years of struggle. It's almost 35 years of struggle. And Western world, on the other hand, is infested with synchrotron facilities. And here I want to say that DSC provides all support, and it is sympathetic with us. So what it does is, it says you go wherever you want, collect the data, we will give you the money. So the students go, collect the data, and come back to India. So they have a 10-day trips in which they go, wait for the turn, collect the data, and come back. And this we cannot do forever. This is something which is really bothering, because what we would like to do in the future, it's already begun. The Western world has already started these areas. Crystallography is no longer static, it is dynamic. We are doing, they are doing using some femtosecond lasers. They are doing photocrystallography, so the crystallography is no longer remaining static. It has become very dynamic. And we can't do this in our country right now with the facilities which have. It's a very pitiable situation. We can't do single molecule crystallography. And pharma industries now are providing proof based on synchrotron data. So pharma industries are losing out heavily by looking at their existing powder facilities. So the need of the hour would be the state-of-the-art synchrotron facilities. I must say that there are already trained experts and engineers who wish to return to India. There are several of them, our own students. But then we had to do something about this. And when all this was being taught, I saw this website which is more disturbing than before. This website says, world's most advanced synchrotron in India. This is sciencepanorama.com, which is published in April 30, 2013. And they say this, and I'm extremely upset about this. And this is where the future is in our country. We have to do something about it. This is ridiculous. This is a total nonsense, because it says even the scientists at Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, were keen. What do you mean by that? To build the synchrotron, but ultimately Saha Institute, is it an election or what? This Saha Institute of Nuclear Physics got the green signal from government of India. Anyway, whoever has got the green signal, it does not matter as long as we get the facility. There is no green signal. Okay, that makes my life easier, because I don't want to see these kind of things anymore. So so the only thing we have. Yes, Indus 2 is what? We have to see what kind of results we get out of it. You have already collected. Oh, great, that's good news. So the future, of course, is here. This so happens it is my group. Okay, so we can latch on to them, and I'm sure they will work, no matter what it is, like we did through the dark ages. These kids will work very, very hard during their stay here, and continue to work hard when they go as postdocs, and eventually they will be the future. So that brings us to the last slide, and I thank you very much. I leave you with this statement from Vedas, which essentially already said everything about diffraction. Okay, you can read it up. I am not going to read it. I'll leave it on that, and thank you very much.